Runway 3, clear to land, caution for the cross on 1206.
Okay, clear to land, runway 3, 7 Charlie, good.
10-5, Tango to Cessna's 11 o'clock, 2.5 miles, slightly higher.
Everything taught in this series is intended for virtual aviation only. While I attempt to replicate real-world procedures on my channel, and so do many of you, I am not a certified flight instructor. If you want to learn to fly in the real world, you must attend a flight training program with a certified flight instructor. This series will attempt to teach and replicate real-world procedures, but is not a substitution for real-world training with a certified flight instructor. You have been warned.
Hello YouTube, Captain Mac here, and welcome to the Pmdg 737 tutorial series. Now this is the series introduction. It's going to be a little bit longer than the introductions for all videos going forward. I just want to tell you what the purpose of this series is. Now, I've flown the 737 in this simulator for many years, and I'm quite familiar with it, especially the version from Pmdg, which is a study level version of the aircraft. I do want to make clear up front that I am not a real-world 737 pilot. I've never flown a 737 in the real world, although I wish that I had. But I am a real-world pilot. I have a private pilot's license, and so I do have a pretty decent understanding of real-world flight operations, at least at the general aviation level. This aircraft from Pmdg is what we call a study level aircraft. It is very in-depth. All of the systems, or at least the majority of the systems, are simulated in the aircraft, and if you really want to know how to fly this thing, it takes a lot of learning. Just ask any real-world 737 pilot. Our purpose here is not to necessarily cover every minute detail of the aircraft, such as well, I don't know, we might cover just about everything. We're going to see. But our overall purpose is to have short videos, anywhere from 5 to 30 minutes, that cover specific functions or aspects of flight. So what I'm talking about when I say aspects of flight is normal operations on the ground and in the air, abnormal operations on the ground and in the air, and then ultimately emergency procedures both on the ground and in the air. So for example, what do you do if you have an engine out at cruise altitude? We'll eventually get to that, but our purpose for today is to start with the very basics and work our way through. Now some of these videos, like I said, will be short, some will be quite long, and there will be a lot of them. For today's video, for example, we're going to cover how to bring power on the aircraft and go through the cockpit acceptance checklist. That's it. That's all we're going to do today. We're not going to talk about aligning the Aorous or setting up the FMC or any of that. Those are going to be videos later on in the future. Now, by the time that I release this video, I will have produced several of them, and if you look in the video description down below, you will see that I'm keeping a running list of links to each one of those videos. So if you've come to this video looking for, say, a tutorial within the FMC, look in that list down below, and if I've completed that video already, you can click on that link and go directly over to that video. That's the plan for this series. It's something I've been looking to do for quite some time, and something that several of you have asked for. If you find that there's something that I appear to bypass, or let's say I forget to do it, or maybe haven't gotten to it yet, please don't hesitate to put something down in the comments asking for that video. If it's not already on the list, I promise you I will get to it. I will put it on the list and we will get to it. So with all of that said, let's jump into our first lesson. And welcome to the 737 flight deck, ladies and gentlemen. If you are unfamiliar with study level aircraft, or with this aircraft in particular, this may be a little daunting to you. This is a study level aircraft, so unlike the freeware aircraft that you get with Microsoft Flight Simulator, or even some of the payware aircraft that are available out there, this aircraft requires you to actually go through proper procedures in order to get things to function properly. What we're going to cover today is going to be our cockpit acceptance procedures and checklist. There's really, to most things you do in the aircraft, there are basically two phases, if you will. There is what we call the flow, which is where you go through the process of what needs to be done, and you you pretty much memorize, not pretty much, you memorize that. You memorize the different things that you need to do, for example, to bring power on the aircraft. And then you have the checklist, and the purpose of the checklist is to verify that you didn't miss anything critical during your flows. And so that's how we're going to go through almost all of our procedures. Now, that being said, there are some things that don't necessarily have what you would call a flow, and maybe not even a checklist. When we get into the FMC, there's not really a checklist for the FMC, and that's all right. We're still going to be able to go through all of the procedures. Now, the process today, the cockpit acceptance checklist and procedures, this is how we bring power on the aircraft and get it prepared to start the day, so to speak. And there are 3 different ways that we can bring power on this aircraft. There is external power, using the APU, and what I call the cheater method, which we will go into at the end. So the cheater method is for those of you who you don't want to mess around with it. You just want to get things up and running. So without further ado, let's take care of lesson number 1. Alrighty then, folks. Most of you already know that typically this is not how the pilots receive the aircraft. Usually the flight engineers or maintenance crew, somebody usually has brought power onto the aircraft at some point before the pilots enter it. This just happens to be the way things work. However, some of you may really want to start from cold and dark, or perhaps it's your first time loading the aircraft into the flight sim. You've never used it before, and you find it like this, and you think to yourself, oh my gosh, what do I do? Or you just want to start from cold and dark. If you find the aircraft in this particular state, the first thing that we're going to have to deal with is what we call the cockpit acceptance procedures and checklist. So as I mentioned before, there's really two phases to this. There's the flow, and then there's the checklist. And so what we're going to do is we're going to show you how to bring power onto the aircraft, and then that's it. That's going to be the entire video here. With that in mind, there are 3 different ways to bring power on the aircraft. There is the use of ground power, and so we're going to show you that, and that's going to be the most common way that you'll bring power on the aircraft initially. There is the use of the APU, which is what you would use if you didn't have access to ground power, and then there is what I call the cheater method, which is for those of us who say, listen, I don't want to go through all the procedures right now. I just want to get the aircraft to a specific state so that I can move on with my flight. So with that in mind, let's start with the basics of what we need to do to bring power on the aircraft. First thing we're going to want to do when we get in here is we're going to want to make sure that the parking brake is set. That's going to be down here, and it is typically not set. I don't know why. Normally I would expect that it would be, but I guess in the real world there's no reason for it to be set because the wheels would be chucked. So go ahead and make sure your parking brake is set, and then you're going to jump up to your overhead here, and we're going to put the battery on the aircraft. Now this is the battery here, and if I just turn the battery on right away and sit here and talk for a while, the battery's going to die. And we all know that I tend to talk quite a bit. But we're going to bring the battery on the aircraft, and then we're going to do a couple other things before we go to our checklist. So first off, we're going to want to make sure that we have ground power on the aircraft. Now there's 2 things you can do here. Right now there is no ground power available for the aircraft. We need to connect it. Now because it's a flight simulation, if you're worried about it, you can connect it first by going down here and holding down the menu button on the FMC, and it'll come on even without power on the aircraft. And if you do this, you can go in here, you can go to ground services, and you can request the GPU card. I'm going to go ahead and do that because we're going to have to request it anyway. The other option would be to wait until you turn the battery on to do that, and then when the GPU card shows up, you'll have ground power available. So the first thing we want to do then, once we've ensured that we've got ground power connected, is turn on the battery. You can either flip the switch on by clicking on the little toggle switch, or you can click just on the cover and it will turn the switch on. Next is to make sure that the electric hydraulic pumps are off, and that's these 2 over here. And up is the off position. If you look closely, you can see off, on, so they're in the off position. We want to make sure that the landing gear The lever specifically is in the down position, and that's this giant guy right here. Now, of course, if it's in the up position, the landing gear is probably not down and we have a different problem on our hands, but we're still supposed to check it anyway. Start levers need to be in the idle then cut off position. Now, I'm not sure. I've always wondered about this. Do they want you to move it to idle and then cut off, or should it have been done at some other time? If somebody knows for sure, let me know, because it seems strange to me to move it up to idle and then put it to cut off, but there may be a purpose specifically for that. Either way, I typically just verify that they're down in the cutoff position, and then we want to make sure that the ground power is on. So we'll go back up here, and on is down for us. There you go. You hear a few things changed, right? You hear some noises going on and so on. And then the next step on the checklist you may have noticed is the fire warning systems. We're not going to do that in this particular video. That's going to be a short video of its own, which will follow immediately after this one. There are a couple other things we should do while we're here. We want to make sure that our signs are on. This is your fasten seatbelts and your what do you call it? Now it's the no electronic sign, because everybody knows you can't smoke on an airplane, right? So you can put it on auto, or you can put it the on position. Doesn't really matter. And then you could, let's see, the signs. Then the recirc fans need to be, the recirculation fan needs to be auto. That's this guy right up over here. Again, these are all things. This one bounces around a little bit, but we just go through each of these. The recirculation fan is up over here, so you want to make sure that that is in the auto position. Engine bleeds need to be off. That's these two down here. So you want to make sure those are off. And for some reason, they're always on when I come onto this aircraft. They're always on. And then we're going to test our overhead lights. And then for whatever reason, I just completely drew a blank on where the overhead light test is, because it's been so long since I've been in this aircraft. But in fact, my memory didn't take too long to come back to me. It is the switch actually that's on the front panel here. And so what I like to do is, now I'm not sure with this one, I should be able to just, if I just click, left click, and then move my mouse away. Some of these test switches, when you do that, eventually they'll go back on their own. Some of them they won't. Hopefully this one won't, because we got a lot of lights to look at. So as you can see, all of the lights on our front panel, our MCP, and so on are working. Same thing with all the lights on our center console. Some of these are important. We've got the fire, fire warning lights, and so on. Same thing with the overhead. All of our lights are working. So we were zoomed in quite a bit there, all the way up to the upper overhead panel. And then any lights, if there were any lights on, warning lights on the circuit breaker panels, those will be working as well, and so on and so forth. So that's the idea here, is to make sure that all the lights are working. There we go. And then we can start passenger boarding. That's it for bringing power on the aircraft with the ground power unit. My brain drew a complete blank there for a second. Now the only difference between that and bringing power on the aircraft with the APU is that we're not going to have access to ground power. So let me show you what that looks like real quick. Now you'll remember that early in this video I said that all of these things that we do, or most of these things we do, they're a flow, and then we use the checklist to back those up. I'm going to start to introduce that concept now. So we're going to show you how to bring APU power on the aircraft. But everything right up to starting the APU I've already covered in the previous portion of this video, where we talk about how to bring power on the aircraft using ground power. So if you want an explanation of everything I'm doing, you need to go back and watch that portion of the video for an explanation, because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through the flow all the way up to the point where we start the APU, And then I'm going to explain how to start the APU. I'm not going to explain everything I'm doing here. So without further ado, let's bring power on the aircraft using the APU. So we want to bring the battery on up here. Make sure that the electric hydraulic pumps are in the right position. Landing gear lever is supposed to be in the down position, so we want to check that down here. Start levers are in the cutoff position, which is these guys down here. So again, I'm literally just explaining, listen, this is what I'm doing really quick. Overhead, I don't think I mentioned overhead fuel valve lights. That's these guys here. Those are supposed to be illuminated because the fuel valves are off, right? Or the fuel pumps are off. We're not using ground power on this one, so I can't bring it on. I'm not doing the fire warning systems in this one. I'm going to do that in another one. I've already mentioned that before. So let's get those guys on. Research fan is good. These guys are supposed to be off, and then we could passenger boarding commence, it says, and we want to remember to test our lights as well, and all of those look to be working just fine. And that's kind of where we left off with the last one, but we had brought GPU power onto the aircraft right away because we didn't want the battery to die on us, and we may hear that happening here shortly. We'll see if it kicks in. So going down the checklist now, parking brake is set, battery is on, electric hydraulic pumps are off, landing gear lever is down, start levers are idled and cut off, overhead fuel valve lights are illuminated. We did not bring on ground power, and we haven't done our fire warning systems yet. The one thing I did miss in the first portion was arming the emergency exits, which is this guy. Same thing as when you bring on the battery, all you do is click on the cover, it'll close it, and it'll turn them on. Signs are both on, recirc fan is auto, engine bleeds are off, and technically passenger boarding would have been commenced. So at this point, because we don't have ground power, we're going to need to turn on the APU. So it's a very simple process. The APU switch is located right here. You're actually going to need to click it down twice, once to on and then once to start. There you go. It's a left click, and the APU will start up on its own. Now, to see if the APU's starting or running, we're going to watch this guy right here. This is the exhaust gas temperature gauge for the APU. It's going to, at some point here, go most of the way up, and then it's going to come all the way back down. And when it gets to about 4, we're going to see the light appear in between here on the APU bus. When we once that happens, we'll move forward from there. Okay, so you can see that the APU generator light has illuminated in the middle. So to turn the APU generators on, just left click down on both of these switches. There we go. And then we're going to want to make sure the APU bleed is on. That's this guy up over here. We can also turn the packs on at this point. You'll hear those come on. And then we're going to look at our duct pressure. And to be quite honest with you, what I probably should have done before doing this was look at what a normal duct pressure is, but I didn't. If that's something you really are concerned about, let me know, and I'll gladly look it up and put it down in the comments section. And that's it. That's how we bring power onto the aircraft using the APU. Now, I did tell you there was a third method that is a cheater method, so let's take a look at that. Now, if you are of the mindset that you don't want to mess with that, either you don't want to remember it, or you're just in a super duper hurry and you don't want to deal with all of that, there is a cheater method that Pmdg has created specifically for you. It's very simple. You're going to jump down here to your FMC. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to bring the battery on or anything. Just hold down the menu button. I've shown you this already. Go to Pmdg Setup and go to Panel State Load, and you'll find in here that there are several different panel states available to you. There's the Approach, Apron, Apron Long, Climb, Cold and Dark GPU, Cruise, Final, Hangar, Runway, and Taxi. Now, I'm not going to sit here and show you what every one of these panel states are, because that's just going to take forever. But I am going to explain a couple of them quickly. Apron is most likely going to be our turnaround state. It's probably what you're typically finding the aircraft in when you first start up the sim. Climb, that's going to be obviously with engines running and all kinds of stuff going on. It could involve a lot of different things. I'm not entirely sure. Cold and Dark, we've already talked about what that is. That's the state we're in right now. Cold and dark GPU would obviously be cold and dark, but with a GPU connected. Cruise is going to be with everything in the condition that it would be in during cruise. Final would be for final approach, I assume. Hangar would be for hangar. Runway would be ready for takeoff. And taxi would be ready for taxi. We're simply going to bring power on the aircraft, and so we're going to choose apron and execute. You can hear the power coming onto the aircraft now. And if we look overhead here, we'll notice, just zoom out a little bit, looks like we're on ground power. The APU is not running, so we can't be on the APU. We're obviously not, we don't obviously have our engines running, so we're going to be on ground power, and some of the basics are taken care of, and now we have power on the aircraft. That's it. That's the cheater method. So now I've got power on the aircraft. Now let's say I wanted to be ready to taxi. I would do the same thing, go to Pmdg setup, panel load, and then I would go to the page, I'll go previous page, I'd select taxi and execute, and now you're going to see that the engines are going to be running and the aircraft's going to be ready to taxi. Or at least it should be. Maybe. It sounds like the engines are starting up right now, but I still don't even have displays at this point, which is interesting. I would think the displays would have come on already, but they appear to be not interested in doing that. So you can see that our overhead looks substantially different at this point. Window heat is on, all of our hydraulic pumps are on, all of our fuel pumps are on, some of the lights have been changed, even this has been changed to 35,000 feet and 50. I don't know what that is, don't worry, we'll get to that eventually. But for whatever reason right now, there they go, they took their sweet time. I was waiting for our flight displays to come on. So now at this point, the aircraft, we've got the flaps are deployed, the brakes are set to RTO. This aircraft is ready to taxi out and take off. Now, there's of course other things that should have been done that would need to take place in the FMC, including flight plan, which will be covered in other videos, but that is how you can quickly bring power on the aircraft if you just don't feel like doing all those other things. That's it, that's all, and no more, ladies and gentlemen. Like I said, the idea of these is to be relatively short. Some will be about this length. This looks to me from the video clips like it's going to be in the 20 to 25 minute range. Some of them will be much shorter. They'll literally just be 2 or 3 minutes, not including the little intro music and stuff. So I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you enjoy this series. Some of you may look at this and say, I don't need this. Go to the full flight tutorial if that's what you're looking for. That's why that's already done. But for those of you who really want to start getting in depth with these things, we're going to see lots of the basics, and then we're going to see lots of the far more advanced stuff coming up in the not too distant future. If you haven't taken the opportunity to do so, I really would appreciate it if you give the video a thumbs up and click on the subscribe button. Everybody knows by now that most of the people who watch videos on anybody's channel are not subscribers. It does help out our channels when you hit the subscribe button. It makes a difference for us, and it makes a difference for the algorithm and our videos being put on display in the search queues and so on. So if you think I've earned it, please hit the subscribe button. Click on the bell if you want notifications, and if you don't click the bell, because otherwise you get notifications every time we release a video. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. As always, keep the blue side up unless otherwise instructed by ATC. God bless you all, and have a fantastic day.